Dickinson, and this is my new pet, Lucy. She's joining me here in my home office. Today I wanted to talk about 7 things that you can do for planning for the upcoming school year. So I'm going to share with you some best practices and things that you should consider before you step into that classroom on that very first day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as leave me a comment. You can tell me how cute you love my baby rabbit. She's so sweet. And I'm going to share a link to our presentation as well as some of the resources I talk about in our presentation. Thanks so much. Dickinson, and I'm here to talk to you about getting ready for the school year because it's almost that time. And you may be wondering what to expect and what to do so you're ready for 2021. Well, I'm here to share with you my 7 tips for getting ready for the school year. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel and leave a comment. Let us know what other videos you'd like to see. Well, educators, as you probably already know, everything begins with procedures and routines. From lining up in the classroom to explicitly teaching your students how to put away their backpacks or what to do if they need to sharpen their pencil. You want to make sure that you have clearly identified those procedures and routines you will be establishing in the classroom. So, just to highlight some things that I love to do as a teacher is that first day of school, and no matter if I'm teaching elementary or middle school or high school, I want my students to line up and show me they are ready, because those first 5 minutes are so crucial and they really set the tone about the type of classroom you're having. So with my middle school students, as they're transitioning to different periods, they'd line up outside the door and they would show me that they were ready, they were quiet. I would greet them right at the door, shake their hands, give them a high five, and have those opportunities to kind of make eye contact and check in with them. It's just a quick way to say, hey, how are you doing today, without really saying anything. Another thing you want to make sure is, how are your students going to communicate with you during instruction if they need a pencil or water or want to get a tissue? So having some hand signals are always really quick and easy ways to communicate and to have that nonverbal communication in the classroom. So if students need to, go to the restroom, they can give you a signal and you can either give them a thumbs up or thumbs down to let them know, like, hey, this is cool for me right now. You could have a checkout system in your classroom with the checkout key. This is really important for middle school so that you can only have one person checking out at a time. And then if there's things like a broken pencil, maybe having some sharpened pencils in the corner of a room where they borrow a pencil and you have certain red tags on it or indicators that it's your pencil and they have to return it. So having those procedures and routines in place are really important, and include other things that are really important, like what about the internet and how will they log on to their classroom website if you are using things like Google Classroom, and what is okay for getting on the computer and what is acceptable and non-acceptable use of the computer. So all of these things, really, it helps you to just write it out, articulate it, have it ready to go, so that when kids are coming in, they want to know what to do with turning in their late homework or how they can get information on an assignment that you've already assigned. You've got that. You have that procedure and that routine in place. And as you all know, it's just going to decrease any type of quote unquote disruptions. And most disruptions are just students not knowing what is the procedure and expectation. It will also give you more time. And in the beginning of the school year, it takes more time to teach all these routines, but as your school year progresses, it's going to move and flow so much quicker, and you'll have more time for instruction, which is always key. All right, next thing that you want to consider while you're planning for the school year is, how are you going to get to know your kiddos? So for me, I love doing student interest inventories, and I often use Google Forms for that. Students get on the computer and they tell me about themselves. They tell me about what they like, tell me about their home life, who their friends are, what they enjoy learning about. So having a way for them to kind of check in with you, share their interests, share their inventory, share their learning style, their learning preference. Do they prefer digital media over taking class notes? And if they aren't able to take class notes, what kind of accommodations they'd like and supports, and just creating that channel of um, providing them a way to share their expectations with you and get to know them. In addition to that, it's so important to tap into those parents. And I think considering last year, we all realized the importance of knowing who our students' parents are. And so at the beginning of the year, get to know your kiddos, but also reach out to those parents and ask them to tell them about their child. Do they live in two homes? Are the parents married or divorced? Do they spend part of their week with one parent and part of their week with another parent? They only have one family. Do they live with their grandmother? So all of these things, this background information is really important. It's going to give you such insight into your students. It's going to let you know when your student's having a rough day, what kind of support you can provide, who you can reach out to, what their home life might be like, so that you can kind of give that extra support that they might need. So reach out to your parents, ask them to write you a letter, ask them to tell you about their child and what are their strengths and what they enjoy. So get to know your kiddos by interest inventories and reaching out to the guardians and parents. Speaking of parents, we also want to establish ways that we can communicate. I think last year was a huge testament to the importance of parent communication. Now, if you're working with kiddos who may come from families that speak other than English, there are wonderful tools that you can access to support you in communicating with the parents. I personally love Immersive Reader. It's free. It works right in there, integrated with Office 365 to give you that immediate translation, as well as Google Translate. And then also establish, how are you going to reach out to parents? Are you going to do a newsletter, which is cute and fun? You can talk about all sorts of events and things that are happening, as well as just best tips and practices for supporting their child throughout the school year. So if you're a primary teacher, you might want to communicate with parents about what kind of environment would be a good space for them while their students are doing their daily reading. What resources and tools can they provide their students while they're doing math if they don't have manipulatives at home? Can they use beans? Can they use Cheerios? So just communicating and letting the parents know that you are a resource. And speaking of parent recommendation, I think one of the highlights of my last year as a parent, was getting a phone call from my son's teacher, checking in, asking about my child, just letting me know that she was available, that she was interested in how my son was doing and how she could best support him. So the phone is always a great way to go. Email, another way to communicate. And then there's always Facebook. And I hear from a lot of teachers that Facebook is a great way to communicate about events, expectations, just share pictures and photos about the classroom. You can always make it a private group. If you don't feel comfortable with Facebook, if you have a parent liaison in your classroom that can run the site, that's another way to do that. And Facebook is super popular with parents. In fact, the average age of a Facebook user is 40. So I'm sure a lot of your parents are already on Facebook. So if you're thinking about maybe using TikTok or Insta, I'd stick with Facebook. And Facebook also has translation included. So a few ideas about how you can communicate. Other teachers have used things like Google Classroom or Seesaw or Class Dojo. Those are all wonderful tools to support you in parent communication. But certainly have a plan in place. And if you don't know, ask your colleagues what they're using at that school. All right. And next, we're going to talk about expectations and consequences. This is so important to have this really established in your classroom before you walk in the first day, because it sets the playing field for the type of classroom environment you are going to foster. So as a primary teacher, I loved having careers in my classroom because it was part of our first grade social studies unit on the community. And we got to learn about people in our community and jobs in our community. So students got to apply for a job that they were interested in. And they got to be part of our career board. And this is just a wonderful way to get students involved and help them see the classroom as a community. And I also love having student jobs, because sometimes you have kids that really just need to move every 5 or 10 minutes. So you can be very purposeful with, like, here's our student that's gonna be the book collector or the librarian, and that will give that child some time to get up and move and erase the board or whatever you need to just have that outlet. In addition to that, you may consider things like having classroom dollars. If you have class bucks at your school or PBIS, you can build into that culture and support that school-wide initiative. I also use tickets in my middle school. It was just a daily way to recognize what was happening and give students that were like on task and participating some recognition. I would just walk around with my class tickets and have them put their name on it, and then they got a prize. And you don't have to like break the bank with your prizes. It can be something like lunch with the teacher, or homework pass, or time to get on the computer and do it, and have some free time to play games. So start thinking about those expectations and those consequences for when rules are broken. And those can also be established with your students. Like, what are fair consequences that you think should happen? And certainly other expectations can be both individual, or it can be a whole class party, or pajama day if you're working with the young kiddos, or crazy hair day, and some fun ways, maybe a movie day, to just acknowledge the hard work and effort your kids are putting in every single day. Because just like you have challenges and things that come up in your life, they do as well. So just honor that and honor everyone's effort. All right. So when we talked about that, you might also want to consider what you're going to do the first week of school. Classroom rules were always part of my first week of school. I'd have my students work in small groups. We'd come up with the class constitution, which, by the way, is also a fifth grade social studies standard. So we would tie in that whole piece of the Constitution. And our students would work cooperatively on creating the class rules, and then we would all vote on it. I'd print it out, make a poster, send it home. They would sign it. Parents would sign it, so that everyone had that understanding of what we need to do to be successful in the school year. And if you want to incorporate things like technology, you could do that. You can have your students create digital posters using Canva, or you can have them post their rules on a tool like Padlet, and then kids can vote for those class rules in real time. Another thing that I love to do the first week of school is talk about growth mindset and what it means to have a fixed and a growth mindset, and that failures are going to happen, mistakes are going to happen. That's how our brain grows. And we talk about our brain and what a beautiful gift the brain is, and that we are here in this space to learn and grow. So really creating that culture of learning, making mistakes, and having an opportunity for your students to learn about that. So there's some wonderful resources on Stanford YouCubed with some videos on growth mindset, and as well as some activities that you can do the first week of school. In addition to that, I love icebreakers. I'm going to share in the comments my classroom bingo, which is so much fun. The kids have a bingo chart, and they have to go around the room and find someone who has a sibling, or someone who wears glasses, or somebody who traveled during the summer, and they get to sign off. And it gives them an opportunity to just start to get to know their classmates, which is so important, because a lot of what you're going to be doing throughout the school year, like group work or turn and talk or project-based activities, require our kids to work cooperatively. So we want to spend some time the first week of school doing those icebreakers, even though they're really focusing on soft skills, which are so important. I also love STEM and STEAM-based activities like the Egg Drop Challenge. They can work cooperatively on that, and spaghetti towers. So you can do a simple Google search and get some wonderful, fun, creative activities that they can work cooperatively with the first week of school, has a low stakes and a high ceiling. And it really does reinforce things like growth mindset because a lot of failure happens when they're doing these STEM based activities. So build it in, don't just talk about it, just give them an opportunity to also experience that. And then you bring it back around and say, okay, we had some failure there with our eggs. What does that have to do with having a fixed and growth mindset? All right. So I talked a little bit about consequences, but it's also important to acknowledge that you are going to have some disruptive behaviors happening. And what should you do? Some of the reasons why you might have disruptive behavior is kids are bored. They have nothing to do. You certainly can have some really high flyers in your classroom. So think about strategies. If your kids are finishing their tasks, what can they do? Can they have access to reading materials and library books so they can do some silent reading? Can they go on a blended learning program and work independently? Can they go to the game center and play a math game or a learning game or something like that? So consider why the behavior may be disruptive and if the kids have opportunities to continue to grow. Respect is always huge. Remember that you have to give respect to get respect, but making sure that you're having those conversations about what respectful behavior is and establish ways that your kids can get to know you. Typically, when kids act disrespectful is they don't feel like they're being respected. You want to make sure that your students feel like this is a really safe space to learn and they can learn about you and have respect for you. Again, another important piece is following through. I think having consequences are great, but if you don't follow through with whatever it is that you say you're going to do, then it can lead to continuous disruptive behavior. So be consistent. If you have a consequence, like, you get a warning, and then if the warning is met with another disruptive behavior, you're going to make a phone call home, you follow through with that phone call home. Lack of routine and procedures may be another reason why disruptive behavior happens. When I shared with you lining up at the beginning, but when the kids line up and they go sit down, if they don't have anything to do, then there's going to be disruptive behavior. They're going to talk to their friends. They're going to get things out. Maybe they don't know what to do, if they should turn their cell phone off. So have that structured schedule from the moment they walk in, they line up, they sit down, they're doing their do now, they're doing, their class warm up, and that will help the flow of your classroom and lead to non-disruptive behavior. Certainly, kids may feel unfairness, so having that consistency in terms of the consequences, it is something that you need to carry through because if the students feel like there's favoritism, it can lead to continuous disruptive behavior. Making sure all of your students are challenged, making sure your students aren't overwhelmed. It's really important in that first week of school that you also get to know your learners, their social skills, their strengths, but also how they are academically, because then you can design instruction that's within your student's zone of proximal development. So think about any type of pre-assessments or data that you can collect from your students to really make sure that you're planning instruction that's just right for your kiddos. And certainly when there is disruptive behavior, don't take it personal. It's not that it's not about you, but it's about that every child needs to be treated fairly, and you don't want to have your kids feel like you're carrying a grudge against them. So let it go and move on. Face those behavior challenges with fairness and continue to teach your children every single day like it's a brand new day. All right, working with challenging students, this certainly does happen, so you need to know what to do. Most importantly is you don't want to get into a confrontation with your students. Make sure that if there is a student that is acting disruptive, pull them aside. You don't want to be standing above them and pointing at them. Make sure you make eye-level contact. Don't embarrass them in front of their peers. Use that soft tone and just communicate with them about the challenge that they're doing and what needs to happen in order for learning to happen. Again, you don't want to talk down. Lots of times kids act out because they could be going through something at home. They could have had a bad experience in another class. So you want to try to establish that communication ask some open-ended questions, try to ask them, where their frustration is coming from and how you can support them. Try to create that safe space and that positive environment for them to really have that conversation with you. Always keep a calm voice. I know that's hard. If you're feeling really frustrated, you can always go in the corner and give yourself a quick timeout, reclaim yourself, your energy before you go and approach your that student, and keep a calm voice. Again, having a process for all those consequences, so things like yelling out or throwing something across the classroom, if you've established those consequences from the onset of the class, then you need to follow through with that process, whether that's documentation, phone call home, and any type of whatever your school is doing. If there's a consequence in program for support, you have followed through with that. And if a student argues, don't argue back. It's really just a whole entire enmeshment of unnecessary anger and angst. So don't argue back. Make sure that your student knows the proper way to communicate and you're communicating with those channels correctly. And come down to their level. So be firm, be fair, and follow through. And don't be afraid to say no. One of the mistakes that I made is trying to be their friend, and that goes nowhere fast. So be the teacher, not the friend. Make sure that you're detaching with love, communicating with parents, and don't default your power to the principal, because then you'll have an entire year of disruptive behavior. Establish that firm authority stance at the onset of the class and continue to be consistent. Always promote a positive classroom environment. Get to know your students. Have routines and rules. Use a variety of instructional strategies. Be flexible and fair. Be firm and have fun. Remember, your energy and emotion is contagious. If you're stressed out and you're feeling angry, the students are going to pick up on that. Number 6, purposeful planning. Be purposeful in your planning. Set those clear expectations. Decide ahead of time how you're going to set that agenda, where you will establish what the students will be doing every single day, how you will communicate with that. Either it's Google Classroom or using a Google slide deck, which I love, and having those clear expectations and purposeful planning. In addition to that, you want to think about whatever tools you're going to use to purposely plan. If you're going to organize your planning using Google Drive, maybe you also have your students create their own Google Drive and their own Google folder for your class so that they can share their work with you. I always love to think about the blended learning programs that I'm going to use. Some of them are free, like Khan Academy. And so to avoid some of those disruptive behaviors, students can log into their Khan Academy account and continue on their blended learning. Certainly, you want to consider about that assessment piece. How will you assess your students daily? Maybe it's an exit ticket. How will you assess them throughout the school year, whether it's a benchmark assessment, summative assessments that you will administer either digitally or paper, and how you're going to collect evidence throughout the school year for students' growth. And certainly you can do things with your students like having goal setting with them after they've taken their initial diagnostics, having talks with them about where areas for growth, what goals they want to set for themselves at the beginning of the school year, how they'd like to grow. So certainly having all of that in place and considering it is so important. All right, and finally, number 7, and I know it's summertime, so hopefully you guys are soaking in the self-care, is just like we talked about your daily routine for the classroom, make sure that you're having a daily routine for self-care, whether that's yoga and meditation, exercise, special rewards for treats, healthy diets, and friends that you can talk to, and community that you can just connect with for your own self-care. All right, y'all. Well, I hope you have a wonderful school year. Feel free to leave a comment on our chat below. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Reach out to me. Again, this is Dr. D. Don't forget to join our Facebook group, and feel free to send me an email with any questions.